Three, two, one. Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Coolbaugh. Today, we have a very special guest, Joe Lee. Joe, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good, Daniel. Thanks for having me on. How are you doing?
Yeah. Oh, excellent, excellent. I always love when I can find somebody on Twitter or social media and like their books, add them, and then anytime I can throw the line out there and get them on, it feels good. Kind of feels like I am a fisherman of men, so to speak, and just it feels good to be able to connect with people, in terms of on social media, which is great, but also getting to actually ask people questions, especially like yourself, in your books. So really been looking forward to this one for a while. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, of course.
We'll actually start with that first question there, Joe. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Wild.
I like that
So
answer.
I first started writing creatively about around like 2018, but I'd had like creative inclinations for long before then. So first came with like my first like big story that like I wanted to write when I was in high school. So this is like mid to late 2000s. Then I started pursuing a career in academia, so all my writing pursuits were academic focused and research
I know that
focused.
feeling.
Yeah. So about 8 years of my life was spent doing like history research instead of creative writing. Uh until like early 2018 when I had a severe burnout during my master's and just did not want to do that anymore. At the like around that time, Tor.com was doing an open call for submissions for novellas, and I so decided to write a prequel novella to like this big series that I had started that I had first thought of like when I was in high school. Had outlined everything earlier that year, wrote a prequel novella, submitted it. It didn't get picked up, but it was kind of like my first journey into that. And then wound up writing another prequel novella, wrote an unrelated full length novel, like first one in 2019. That's not been published yet. Then I finally got to that big project that I've been planning for however long, 10 years or so. Got about 70,000 words into it and then gave up. And then that's when I suddenly turned to the Bleeding Stone right over here. When that idea just kind of came to my head, just came organically and was just more attention grabbing than the big project I was working on at the time. And yeah, it's kind of been what my writing life has been like since early 2020, since just before COVID hit is when I started writing this series.
Oh wow. Well, that's awesome. I gotta say, the first time I saw the cover for the Bleeding Stone, I was just like, "What?" I found it out you on Twitter, and I was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Why? Where has this person been?" It's like I look under every rock. I'm on every social media, and I was like, the algorithm did me dirty. I felt like I felt like somebody who writes historical fantasy or historical urban fantasy, as I like to call it. I'm like, why did this not pop up for me sooner? But I was so excited to see your cover, and then when I'm looking at the series title, I was so excited. I don't even think I got to the blurb. For a minute, I sent it to my friend. I was like, check this out. And then we actually read the blurb together via like Facebook Messenger, and it's like right up his and my alley. So we've been trying to read in book club, but just getting two different jobs has been. I had got a new job. He just got a new job, so it's been very difficult. I told him, I was like, I'm not waiting for you anymore. He's like, yeah, it's okay. But yeah, it was super cool. I love the concept right away, so it was really neat. But yeah, I was so happy to that it came across at the time that it did, just so you know, because for me, I was like, oh, how am I going to do this thing? And had people done something similar before, so it was really cool to see you with the Bleeding Stone do something very similar to what I want to do. It gave me like a lot of confidence, and that this is something that people would want to read. So
Yeah, and like gradually uh and it definitely does feel kind of like almost like a little niche subgenre.
yeah.
It's like
Yep.
historical fantasy where this is, you know, like it's based loosely off of like age of exploration and colonial
Yep.
America, but from the indigenous perspective. And it's like that was never something I really saw. And yeah, I it and like finding that readership, it's slowly but surely coming. It was a slow first few months, and then I guess the algorithm finally found me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So um, but yeah, I'm Spiffbo was a huge help with that too, with finding new
Mm,
readers, and
yep.
found like people who are like within my niche, I guess, and more people in reading it in the last few months than in the first few. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it's always a plus.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's cool. I just was like, oh, this, I don't know. I just, to me, it just seemed really cool. I think, again, I just want to point out because you said subgenre too, and there are certain subgenres I think now, we kind of take for granted because they're bigger. When I talk to people, they're like, "Oh, what's historical urban fantasy?" And I'm like, "Well, like same thing as urban fantasy, but for me, writing about Roman, military times with these creatures and tropes and things, and so I think that I think in the future, you're really going to see historical fantasy, really take off. There are certain authors I've talked to, like yourself, who really enjoy history. I'm a history teacher, so that's like something, that's why I was like, oh, this is cool, like I really like Native American studies. I love them actually. We're just about to start a unit with my kids, and I always thought, oh, it'd be really cool to do some sort of, something with Native Americans, and mix with this time period, and switch things around, give them magic, or or something, and just kind of see what happens, So your storyline to me sounded really, really interesting and unique. So
Yeah, and then like especially like going back to your point about like subgenres being very niche originally, like go back like what, a year or two ago. I mean, cozy fantasy was absolutely nothing.
thank you.
Like
Yep, that's a
like
great,
like
yeah.
like Travis
And
Baldry
Travis blew up.
releases
Yep.
Legends and Lattes, and all of a sudden it's this huge thing now.
Boom. Yep.
And then
Yep.
like same thing with Romantasy and how Book Talk has been eating
Yeah.
that up in the
Yep.
last year. So
Yep. And again, I think it goes back to, like ZS Diamante and I, which actually be the episode before this, with Stone and Sky. We just talked about like, just like clean fantasy basically. Like your typical Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, that kind of fantasy. That's what I like to write as well, like in terms of my own fantasy realm, as well as like historical fantasy or urban fantasy. But like, yeah, it's just interesting, to see where I think it just goes, to show you that just write what you want to read or write what you want to write, because it's that field of dreams aspect, right? Like,
yeah.
you have to find those people, but if you do it and can find those people, they'll probably really enjoy what you're doing. And my friend made a good point. She was like, "What? There's like over 7 billion people on the planet. Somebody's gonna like your book. Just depends on the language or geographic location or time period." But yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great
Law
point.
of averages plays into your favor eventually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Eventually, you just got to keep shouting and
Mhm.
throwing against the wall, I guess. But so we talked a little bit about genre, but what genres do you currently write in and why?
Yeah, so like we already mentioned, the Spellbinders and the Gunslingers, it's mostly based in historical fantasy. There's some epic fantasy thrown in, like elements of that, and a little bit of dark fantasy. I'm hesitant to call it grim dark because there's some dark subject matter, but like I'm cautious towing the line of grim dark because now like I feel there's more negative connotations with it nowadays because people are just expecting it to be really brutal. Like recent example, like 11 Cycle, like by Kian
Oh,
Ardalan,
yep,
is
yep,
brutal as all hell, like very
yep.
grim dark. And I don't want people going with the expectation of me saying it's grim dark with it's gonna be bloody and very oppressively depressing. It's depressing but in a different way. So I call it dark, just it's not full grim dark, it's just dark fantasy.
Yeah,
But there's that, and then there's also a splash of western in there as well.
mm,
But yeah, um so I mentioned earlier, but I had pursued a career in academia for about 8 years. So my background is in history as well. And getting to feel like I'm actually putting my degrees to use, where nowadays like my career has nothing to do with my degrees.
Hmm.
So feeling like I'm actually putting my putting my education to use and having like these like historical backdrops just it's kind of shoved in here. That's more of my main interests have been lying lately. I'm also working on some like larger epic fantasy. I
Hmm.
have an urban fantasy written already. That was the novel that I
Oh,
wrote
cool.
in 2019. And yeah, I try to reach from like a lot of different genres. I can like some like horror every now and then as well. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's like my friend, like, I think again, trends, and somebody had mentioned to me, like I just got really into like the sword and sorcery again. I got really
mhm.
into Fritz Lieber, Paul S. Kemp, The Hammer and the Blade. I went back and listened to them. I'm like, I love the buddy cop aspect, like Lethal Weapon. People ask me, like, what's your Kid of L series about? I'm like, it's like Lethal Weapon in a fantasy setting, like kind of meets Conan and with
Mhm.
Mission Impossible like stakes. And but it's funny because my friends like, well, you're kind of here and here. I'm like, I just love different genres. I'm like, I just love the story, and in tailoring. I said it's fun to me, and I think a lot of people in the past have said, like, you got to stick to this genre. But I think if your name's not really established yet, I think you can totally do one thing or the other, and kind of see where the chips lie, so to speak. I've seen a lot of authors within the last 5 or 6 years, like yourself, who have done maybe some historical fantasy and then done urban fantasy, and maybe they did, decently or even really well with one, and all of a sudden urban fantasy takes off, for whatever reason, because they got the voice or the characters or had a particular story down. So, yeah, I don't know. I like different genres. Don't get me wrong, I like to read them, but I love writing in them. I think it's just really fun
Yeah,
to, try and break that down.
yeah, and like getting to have that range, especially where
Mm,
I'm.
yep.
It's not even like a necessary like a notoriety issue. I mean, you look at like someone like R.F. Kuang, who like she started with the
Mm,
Poppy War. That was like very much like grim, dark historical fantasy.
yep.
But then she goes to Babel, which is dark academia, and then she just
Yeah,
released
yeah.
Yellowface earlier this year, which is just literary fiction with surprise horror thrown in too.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like it's kind of liberating just be able to like grab like whatever like especially like with indie publishing, like you're not really
Yeah.
restricted as much as you might
Yeah, yeah,
be
yeah.
like pigeonholed with traditional
Yep.
publishing. um
Yep.
so and then like even just like with the Spellbinders series, when I first started I was like kind of like what how you were describing like the similarities to other properties with your own work. I like I started off saying it's like, oh yeah, so it's like kind of dark fantasy, it's kind of historical fantasy, it's this and this and this, and then I realized I can just say it's the Last of the Mohicans but with magic. So
It's a good sell right there because, man, what a great book and what a great movie.
mhm.
That's awesome. That's super
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, one of my favorite Daniel Day-Lewis movies.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Definitely my dad's favorite for sure. Definitely top two for me. I actually was just talking about that book the other day. With somebody on here actually. We were just talking about, I don't know if we were recording now, but we were talking about, influential books, and they said they're like, oh, I want to mention this, but it's a fantasy, sci-fi, and horror podcast. I said, well, to me, his history has a lot to do. I'm like, where do you find mythology or the most horror that's in history, So
Mhm.
I think I pull a lot from it, like you were saying, and I think that I was like, I think Last Mohicans totally fits for this podcast personally.
Yeah.
I had a friend, they're like, you just love that book. I was like, that's true. I'm about to go reread it really soon with a friend.
Yeah,
But yeah.
but there's nothing wrong with that. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm the one, I always talk about influences, and I think that, I think it's so cool that people are taking influences like that and then, adding fantasy or sci-fi or horror or whatever. I think you just get some of the coolest, you look at Cameron Johnston, with the Maleficent Seven, I mean,
mhm.
that's a brilliant idea, and I'm always trying to think, like what would I want to do, and what would be really cool. So I think, yeah, I think Last Mohicans mixed with magic, like that's what as soon as I read your blurb, that's what I was thinking. I was like, this is so my kind of book.
Yeah.
Like, this is my niche. I was like, I am home now, so I can feel a little bit better about it. But yeah, that's awesome. So I added this one because I was just talking to a lot of people in my podcast group. I'm curious at what has been one, I know it's hard, but what is one major obstacle that you've had to overcome with your career so far?
So when I was navigating self-publishing, so this was last year, well, 2022, yeah. When I made the decision to self-publish The Bleeding Stone, it went through the ringer of like just
Mm,
figuring out how to properly self-publish because I
mm,
wasn't really ingrained in the community at the time. I had like 30 Twitter followers. I knew nobody. So my so I had reached out to Felix Ortiz, who's the
Such a nice guy.
legendary cover artist of
Yep.
indie fame. The and uh, and he did the phenomenal cover work for it. And then he collaborates a lot with Sean King, the
Yep.
designer. And when I booked Felix in like, so I think I first emailed him like December of 21. I had falsely assumed that I'd also booked Sean at the same time without actually talking to
Oh,
him because I thought they
oh,
just kind of always worked in a
yeah, yeah,
tandem.
yeah. Yep. Yep.
Um, I finally thought to ask when Felix was like midway done with the illustration, and it's like, oh, whoops, I guess I should email him. So I emailed Sean, and then that also set me back like another 3 months or so at the time. So like this was like May of 22 that Felix had the illustration done. Sean gave me a date around like September of 22 that he'd get the design done. And then Sean was involved in a few different Kickstarters, like the Sword of Kaigen Kickstarter,
Yep.
which is actually
Crazy time for him.
got it right here now.
Oh, it looks awesome.
Then like the AC Cobble's Warhite books, he was doing a
Yep.
couple Kickstarters for that too. And so it got pushed to about like right before Thanksgiving of last
Mm,
year, which was about 2 weeks before I wanted to publish The Bleeding Stone because I was dead set on getting it out before Christmas last year. And it was a mess just trying to get everything lined up, get everything out in time. The paperbacks I wound up just doing pre-orders directly through myself just because it was
mm.
going to take forever to get up on Amazon. Or
Oh,
so
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought. It actually wound up being like 2 days later, but whatever.
Oh, wow. That's quick.
And
I wouldn't have expected that.
yeah, like I did not expect it either. I was expecting Ingram to take like a couple weeks to get it over to Amazon
Yeah,
because
yeah,
that's
yeah. Especially that
everything
time
that
of
I
the
had
year.
read. But it
Yeah, yeah.
and the pre-order button was up there, but I had to.
Wow.
It was a very stressful rush to the end that it really taught me a lot about like properly planning things. I now I make sure like whenever I email Felix and Sean that I'm copying them both and make sure that they're booked at like around the same time.
Yeah.
Like I learned a lot with navigating editors and like different resources for that. Um, and then marketing, I'm still figuring that out, but now I have friends, which I didn't have last year. So that's
Yeah.
so really just kind of like ingraining myself in the community, and that's helped a ton with all those first year struggles. And now the first year struggles are just second year struggles, but they're not as
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just want to point out because we haven't talked about this on here in a while, but that's actually one reason why I do this podcast. My friend was like, "Oh," I said, "Oh, it'd be cool to learn from people and get to know people and stuff." And then it very quickly, well, at one point, we had some financial stuff happen, so we had to pay for stuff. So all my Felix, Sean money, Sarah Chorn, whoever I could have gotten to do the best of the best job was all gone. So I'm like resaving, which is why I'm doing my Kindle Bella series because I have a bunch of authors helping me and stuff, to edit and give feedback and stuff. But yeah, it just like, but like my friend was like, "Oh, well, you should ask for something now." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "We've been doing this for 2 years. You don't ever ask for anything. You just like help people." I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "I guess I could, because you could run a Kickstarter." He goes, "I'm sure, He goes, "How much do you really need?" And I was like, "Oh, blah blah blah." He goes, "I'm sure by now, like your podcast group or whoever, like people could share. He goes, you could probably hit that, small goal, a couple like thousand or something, pretty easily, and then, do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, oh, I totally forgot about, that it goes both ways. I was just so
Mhm.
used to, it's just fun to, get in the community and, people know you or send people to you or, stuff like that. But I would highly encourage people in the audience, if you're, where Joe was, where I was a few years ago, like actually get on and talk to people, have conversations with them, share Joe's books, say, hey, that's a great cover, or whatever, just be people to people. And I really feel like you'll be surprised at how much further you'll go than just being like, here's my book or this or that, or asking for things all the time. I don't know. That's just been my take. And now I have people asking like, what can I do for you? Steve Guklich, who I'm about to have on here a few episodes ago, he was really great. He actually helped me out with our new YouTube banner. Absolutely
Mhm.
looks amazing. So if anybody really likes it, go and see Steve for his services. But yeah, he did an amazing job and helped me out with that. But yeah, I think you're totally right. It's just so important to get out in the community as soon as you can. People are always like, why are you doing this and that? You're not even ready to, publish. You got a lot of stuff in the works. I'm like, well, but you got to get out there and be seen. I talk to my econ kids about that all the time, in terms of advertising. It's not even about selling a product at this point. It's just about being seen. So I think that's really great advice.
Yeah, for sure. And then I remember when I was sending out arcs for the Bleeding Stone last year, just kind of hoping somebody would read it.
Yeah.
Kayla from Kay's Hidden Shelf actually directed me to Discord group that she was in, the Indie Accords, and that
Oh,
was kind of
cool.
when I first like really first started to meet a lot of like these indie authors, and like
Mm.
at first it was extremely intimidating because again I didn't know anybody yet at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
um but that was really just kind of like the stepping stone of like meeting like people who are now like very good friends of mine,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
who like meeting your people who are gonna shout about your book from the rooftop, and you'll do the same for them.
Yep.
So it was a it was a great, like getting involved in not only like social media like on Twitter and all of the Twitter replacements now,
Yeah.
and like different Discord servers. Like I've been on the India course for the last year, and that's been great. And then uh Page Turner's Discord that my friend Bo Kelly runs, and you get to meet not only great authors and just like great readers, but also like phenomenal resources. Like I didn't know who Sarah Chorn was until well after Bleeding Stone was edited, and
Mm.
now I know she's basically like the Felix Ortiz of editing.
Yep.
Like she's the one who you want to go for.
Yeah. I love
And
that. She's the one.
at that point it's like well, I've already I've already got two in the bag now. I can't just say, hey, here's the third book. You haven't read the first two yet. Or
Yeah,
will you?
yeah, yeah.
But I do hope to work with her like some point in the future. So Sarah, if you're listening to this, hi. But
I'm gonna have her on. I keep every time I have sent something, it's like her. I've had something. She's always so busy. And then I had my son, so I felt so bad with her latest book. It just did not work. But I'm so hoping to to have her on and pick her brain from both marketing, editing, and writing aspect. But yeah,
yeah,
she's
oh
awesome.
yeah, and she's an absolute gem too. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I've only read Necessity of Rain, but like it
Hmm.
absolutely floored me. But yeah, I definitely need to jump on her other books at some point too.
Yeah, I actually have her actually in my queue. I have like three I still have to finish for reviews, and I had somebody like came to me last minute. They're like, "Will you please?" I'm like, "Yep, I'll help you." Like, yes, I will. So I'm like, really, I told her a while back, I was like, I'm trying. I was like, my kid doesn't help very much with the reading part, but I need to start doing more audiobooks. I have such a hard time. I like to read them and then do the audible. I feel like I get a better experience that way. But it's
Yeah,
just, I'm like,
I
my,
usually
my
do
wife, she's like, there's no way.
yeah, I usually do like audiobooks in tandem with like a physical copy, just
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
especially with larger books, because I don't want
Yep.
to have it take like a month to get through a book.
Oh, yeah.
And But audiobooks are also tricky with me because I will just kind of zone out and forget that I was listening to an audiobook, and then like
Yeah,
all of a
yeah.
sudden
Some of the
like
names are hard. Yeah.
yeah, and then all of a sudden like 2 chapters have passed by and I've retained none of it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. We're doing the Crippled God, Mal's Book of the Fallen, and we did the last book too. And it's like it's just so hard because I need to see the name to remember it, and I'll be like,
Mhm.
who's this person? By the time I figure it out, I like miss half the chapters. I have to like go back over it, and I'm like, it's not my favorite way to do it. And I found out though I'm a very visual, reader.
Mhm.
And that's like a writer too. Like I like to actually I like to type over writing, so I think that yeah, I feel like I've just been missing a lot as a reader, doing it that way. But yeah, I have to actually read, whether it's Kindle or paperback or hardcover. I've just learned that recently, and I learned when I do the Audible, I do the same thing. I'll zone out, I'll start thinking my own book, or be like, oh, that's cool, and then I won't actually be listening to whatever the
Yeah,
narrator
what
is saying. But
yeah, one of my buddies is going through the Malazan series now on audio, and like he like the last time I went down and saw him, he was talking about just the absolute batshit insane stuff that goes on in Malazan, and like all the
oh
similar
man, it's
names,
crazy.
all the like the convoluted reasonings for everything, and it's like I would never be able to do this on audio if it was my first time
It's so
reading it.
hard. Yeah, no, it's if it hadn't been like the second half of the last book, and we were pretty much done with the last book, and then the Crippled God, I was just like I'm a little bit more used to it now, but still, like I said to my buddy, I was like, like we're really trying to we want to be done because we've been doing it for 3 years, and in February for a book club, so we're like we're trying to be like under the wire, so to speak. We're really trying to get to Way of Kings as well, and just
Mhm.
we just want to find how the story ends. But just so we could say we did like one of the hardest ones that and longest ones that people have done. I'm halfway through the Wheel of Time myself, so I think I'm gonna finish
Mhm.
before he's able to do it with me. But yeah, but it's just I told him I was like in the future I was like I'm not doing Audible. I was like it might take us longer. Might do like 20 pages a week, physical or Kindle. I said I can't do the Audible with the fantasy because it's just the names. It's just I just don't remember them. I don't retain them. Yeah, it's harder to keep track.
Yeah, I can definitely understand wanting to want to like tackle one of those huge series because I finished the Wheel of
Yeah.
Time
Oh,
early
nice.
last year. And it was one of those things I think like start of 2021. I think one of my New Year's resolutions was to finish reading the Wheel of Time because I think I had
Yep.
read the first 6 books at that point.
Oh, nice.
Plus the prequel. And
Hmm.
then, like then the slog was coming up and it was like, I'll
Yep.
just keep putting it off. And then it gets to be November. It's like, oh crap, I said I was going to do this. So then I did the absolute insane thing of marathoning books 7 through
Yeah.
14.
Wow. I give you credit for that.
And good God, I was yeah, that was a rough go, especially when you get to books 9 and 10, which are
Yeah.
uh honestly complete dog shit. But
Yeah.
book 9 is one of the best endings in the series, so at least that
That's what
part
I
is worth
hear.
it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Well,
but
it's crazy
yeah.
when everybody says that and you have to but you have to get through. My friend, he started to actually do the Audible
Mhm.
for 7, 8, and 9, and then he stopped. He's like, I can't do it. He's like, I have to same thing kind of with Malzahn. Not that it was as hard to read, but he's like, he like ended up switching back to paperback. He's like that was definitely better for him at least. But so that's why I think I'm gonna continue to either do that or Kindle, rather than doing the Audible. But
Yeah, and it gets well worth it when you get to like the final one that Jordan wrote
yeah,
in its entirety. And then when Sanderson takes over, like I mean, obviously it's a night and day difference because
yeah, yeah.
the pace is so much quicker, but I mean
Yep.
Sanderson did phenomenal job of wrapping it up in my opinion.
I
For
give him
something
credit because like
yeah, for something that enormous to be able to like just finish it to begin with, and B just to finish it to the quality that he did. Like that is
yeah, yeah.
I'm I'm Sanderson has my respect for numerous reasons, but just being able to finish the Wheel of Time as well as he did is definitely high on the list too.
Yeah, I can only imagine like finish reading it, let alone having to be the one to finish writing it. And then
Yeah.
to keep so many, not that everybody was happy, but to keep so many people happy. Particularly like I feel like everybody I talked to for the most part really enjoyed, A Memory of Light,
Hmm.
being one of the best books. yeah, so it's just crazy to me to, to think of somebody having to, to do that. I know he had the notebooks, he talked to his wife a lot and stuff like that, and the assistants, but still, I love the story on Daniel B. Green's podcast where he tells the story about how he got the gig and what he had to do and stuff. It's like if anybody in the audience has not listened to it yet, it's really, really cool. And you'll learn a lot of really interesting, just like writer perspectives and stuff like that. But I
Mhm.
actually just finished the first Mistborn book the other day. I loved Warbreaker. I read that one before Aloe of Law. And then I read the first Mistborn. Yeah, so like my buddy's like, oh, let's do Way of Kings. I was like, okay. I was like, I've done a lot of Sanderson lately, but I was like, that's fine because everybody tells me that that one's really good. I actually met him actually right when Way of Kings first came out. Um, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
And then I met Patrick actually right when In the Name of the Wind came out at the same show. And like a bunch of other people, like it was crazy. I spent like all day at the Poison Pen in Scottsdale. It was really cool. Kevin Hearn had put it on, and like Brian McKellen had just put out the first Gunpowder Mage book. He was there.
Mhm.
Michael J. Sullivan was there after like his fourth book. Um, just yeah, there's just so many people. I realized that Pierce Brown was there. And I
Oh,
totally
jeez.
forgot. And I met him. He was awesome. Yeah, it was just really cool. I spent like all day, like my wife at the time was my girlfriend. She's like, "Are you still at that bookstore?" I spent all day. First, I like went through, I took pictures with them, I had them sign stuff. Then I went back, bought a few more books, and there were like a lot of people there. And then I went back later on to start talking about writing and craft and stuff. And it was really awesome to talk to so many people about it. But yeah, it was really
Yeah,
cool. There's
and
somebody else the other day I just thought of that was there, but
and especially just like, and you said it was around when Way of Kings came out, so like
yeah,
around like
especially the
2010. So
time in
there's
which
like,
a lot of yeah, yep.
yeah, so like, like Rothfuss, I obviously he had like Name of the Wind was a few years prior to that, but Pierce Brown, like
Yep.
he was nobody then. Like
Yeah, he was at a little table,
like
like
Red Rising hadn't even come out yet.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah. I think they had just. I don't even know if his pre-order had been released. Like, I think it just. Yeah, his book had just been released. Like, but it was like that was the line of his shows. Like that was one of the shows, and then they were doing the Phoenix Comic Con, which I missed a bunch of them because like they were on like the wrong day or something like that. Because I had went to that day, and then they were going on. It was like Saturday. They were going on Sunday all day. But yeah, it was just crazy. And I think back to that. I'm like, then, but a lot of those people had convinced me with some other authors had convinced me that indie publishing was a viable option, and something smart. And they had always, really talked about community. And I got to say, that was like the number one thing that kept coming up. And it's just so interesting that that's the one thing that I absolutely still agree with them, no matter what has changed or hasn't changed. But yeah, community has definitely been the number one thing that they were right about. It's always the most fun, I think, in the indie community personally. But yeah.
yeah, yeah, and like when you become an author, suddenly you just have friends all over the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cool. Yep.
Like like I'm getting married next month, so that like
Oh, congrats. That's awesome.
time recording this, that'll be November, then honeymooning in
Yeah, yeah.
December. And and then one of my buddies, Joao Silva, I wrote Seeds of War.
Mm.
He lives in London, and I'm probably gonna go visit him like
Oh,
while
that's cool.
while we're in London on our honeymoon. And it's like that's like a year ago, I was like, yeah, I don't really know anybody in London,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but yeah, now all of a sudden it's like wherever you go, there's someone that you know, which is
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
cool with this community.
Yeah, well, that's like Michael R. Fletcher. He's just north of me, really, like a little northeast of me, because he's over on the across the border for Canada. I'm in Central New York, and I'm always talking about want to go to the Toronto Comic Con or one of those. He's like, "Oh, if you come, let me know." And then Dirk's in Ohio, so Dirk Ashton. At one point, the three of us were gonna meet, and then they can't. They like, oh, it really stunk because I was totally ready, and it was like a very drivable, fall 2 falls ago, but COVID
Mhm.
really restricted the board at that time. So, we ended up not being able to go on this side. But I was like, oh, that was so cool that, I said I was going and people were like, oh yeah, we'll go, and meet up and stuff, with people that I had only talked to for a couple years on social media. But yeah, it is super cool. I agree. I had some people, that were like, yeah, in the UK, they're like, hey, if you just get here, we will let you Airbnb at our place
Yeah.
or crash or whatever. Yeah. So that's really cool. No, I totally
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, or even like I was getting like serious FOMO, like was like a month and a half ago when Dragon Con
So
happened.
bad.
Like and like
So bad.
so many people went to Dragon Con this year.
Yep,
Like
yep,
that like I would love to meet in person. Um like um like Sadir, like I know his episode went
yep,
out a couple weeks ago.
yep,
Like he
yep,
went, and Dirk was there.
yep.
Ryan Cahill
And
was there. Like
they were with David, right? Yeah, they went with David. I was like, oh, with a shirt. I was like, no, it was like I didn't know that. Yeah, it's like I told my mom, I was like, because it was our birthday, but like we weren't able to go to Michigan to see her. So I said to my wife, I was like, if, like my son, it was just too hard to travel. But Sadir's like, are you gonna make it? I was like, no. I was like, I told my wife I stayed away from social media that whole weekend, but it didn't
yeah.
help because people were still doing stuff like the next week, and I just yeah, the FOMO was real. It was really
Yeah,
bad. But
I
yeah,
feel like next year with Worldcon in Glasgow,
yep.
it's like the FOMO is going to be there again because again, I think a lot of people are going, and
I've seen a lot of people.
I'm
Yep.
going to be in Scotland that same weekend, like for a wedding. So
Oh.
like I could go for like a day,
Yeah,
but also I have to go to a wedding.
yeah,
So
yeah. Oh
so it's
man.
either that or I'll just hold off for Worldcon in Seattle in 25 or something.
I'm gonna see you there because my buddy and I we've talked about that because we've been wanting to meet Patricia Briggs for so long. We love her books. So I told him I was like 2025. I was like, we're going. I said there is nothing that's gonna stop us from going. I told my wife, I was like, well, we're gonna like get a huge Airbnb. I was like, we can all go or what I was like, but we're definitely going. I said that's one of our few chances to see people like Sean Crow, a lot of people that are out there that way. So yeah,
Mhm.
I'm feeling on that one. That one's on our list already for
Yeah.
2025. So yeah, yeah. But it's cool to be able to, to go to things like that and yeah, to I talked to a couple people about oh my gosh, where do we go? We're going to Gen Con next year,
Mhm.
for sure, which is gonna be fun in Indianapolis. Yeah, so we're gonna do that one. We're gonna do two others too. I can't remember where we're at. I guess the Pittsburgh, it's either Pittsburgh or Philadelphia one. My friend said last year they couldn't believe how many people were there, and then I FOMO'd because I was like, oh, I'm gonna go. And I was like, oh, I'm not gonna go. And then all of a sudden he took all these pictures with so many cool people. Like William Zabka was just hanging out there and taking photos of people, and
Yeah.
he got some really cool books signed and stuff. But yeah. Well, we're kind of wrapping up on time a little, so I want to make
Mhm.
sure we get to that fourth question, particularly about your books, because I just want to make sure that people know exactly what they're about because they should go and buy them and then review them. That way, we'll make sure that you can get some really cool cover art and Sarah Chorn or whoever you need, later on for your urban fantasy and other books. But what is the Spellbinders and Gunslingers trilogy about, and how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, so it's like I said earlier, it's kind of like Last of the Mohicans, but fantasy. So it's basically a deconstruction of the idea of history being written by the victors, where we're kind of
Mhm.
shown what like a victorious hand penned the nation's history to be, and then it's juxtaposed with like the actual events that happened. So it's told from the indigenous perspective primarily. Um, and it's showing like the waning days of this war of conquest, and it's the central character is a tribal outcast named Sen, so she's kind of almost like an outcast among outcasts in a sense. So um and it's it follows from like her, like the Bleeding Stone follows from her goal to rescue somebody to prove her worth to her people, and when the war gets to be when the war finally reaches her part of the land. So it's a so when I first started writing it, I have a weird tendency to come up with ideas based on titles that just randomly pop into my head. And it was one of those things where I was just walking down the street one day and just random brain blast. Hey, Spellbinders and Gunslingers sounds like a really cool name for a thing.
It really does.
And like, I had nothing else at that point. Like I was like, yeah, this could be like a western or something. I don't know. And like there was like some weird proto ideas that came up before it turned into um this series based on like historical erasure and censorship and like uh anti-colonialism and all of that. So yeah, it just kind of it's really just like one of those like shower thought things. It's like, hey, this sounds like it'd be cool. Why not do that? And I kind of just dropped that huge series that I was planning for over a decade, and was like, this sounds more interesting. And I like the um like the publishing trends were just at the time where it's like, yeah, then those different perspectives are what we kind of want right now.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And so I pursued that, tried the traditional route, and that process sucks. So then I did the self-publishing route, and like that process also kind of sucks, but it's at least rewarding at the end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, totally. It's so funny because I met an author a while back in a group that was like, oh, I he was ready to indie publish, and then I can't say who it is because they haven't like fully released yet. But they had just said like, oh, before I indie publish, I think I need to get rejected. So then they
Yeah.
sent out their idea and their manuscript and they got picked up. So now they had to pull everything, and then they had to take down the post. I think I was one of like 10 people to see it, so it's kind of funny. But I always tell people, I'm like, I feel like I just want to send something out just so I could say I was rejected, just so I could be like part of the club, um, because there's so many, Michael R. Fletcher talks a lot about that, when he was picked up, right, for Beyond Redemption, and then that struggled, so that he took it back and then re-release it. So I think it's so interesting, to see different perspectives on that. But yeah, I just think it's so cool though that you chose those different perspectives. As a history teacher, I'm like, why did I not think of something like that? And it's really, really cool, just to see. I'm really interested. Like, I went through chapter one for the Bleeding Stone. I'm really interested to get back. So I think I'm like two away from you right now. Yeah, because Sarah's three. So I think I'm like two away from you right now, for finishing Bleeding Stone and being able to get back to it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really enjoying just thinking about like where you're going and what you're able to do with the time period. And just talking about the colonialism, talk about the different perspectives, and being a history teacher and always trying to think about those and bring them up. I think it's just such a cool, just as a writer, I just want to kind of see, how you did it and like kind of where you went, with certain things and characters and voices and things like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and then and part of it was also kind of like a um almost like an airing of frustration with how history tends to be, especially colonial American history, how it's tended to be taught here in the US, where
Yeah.
like the story of the first Thanksgiving and how like
Oh,
the Native Americans were happy to share their land with European settlers, and then they went down the Trail of Tears because they were so happy they cried about it or something. I don't know. Like that's a so it was a definitely a like an airing of frustration in that regard, where
yeah.
you know again, history being written by the victors, but is that it's almost like truth is a matter of perspective type of thing, right?
Yeah, well, it's crazy because like I just talked to a couple kids in the spring at my old job, and they said something like, "Well, why are we learning this?" I'm like, "Guys, I've been studying history since I was 4 years old. I'm like I'm just turned 36. I'm like it took me 5 years ago and somebody's random Instagram rant, about the same type of thing, perspective and things. I said to learn about the Tulsa race riots. I said I study history. I said I study history. I said, and for it to be purposely not mentioned is pretty crazy. And every time I mention Andrew Jackson, who I can't stand, sorry if anybody really likes him, he shouldn't be on the $20 bill. We got a lot of people like that, and everybody talks. Abe Lincoln was great. I'm sorry, but history teacher soapbox for a minute. We never talk about how horrible he was during his presidency towards the Native Americans, and their Native American removal. We'll talk about a guy like Jackson, but not Abraham Lincoln. So yeah, it's pretty crazy, I think, and that's why I tell kids, I'm like, you never know what you're going to do with it. I, mentioned, books like yours. I said, maybe you'll take it and you'll write something to teach somebody about, perspective, or, or just opening your mind up, to, looking at history or life even, through a different lens. But I think that's what's really cool about, your books, and, you're able to, to do that. And, um, yeah, I just think it's really interesting from a history teacher's perspective, to get somebody, who's done what you have done, with your books, and those perspectives. And I'm one of those people. I really want to. I got called out a few years ago by a writing friend. He's like, it just seems like you're writing white European dudes, and I'm like, never realized. I was like, oh, dude, you're right. And he's like, yeah, and um, I really took a look, and I was like, well, I really like these female characters like Red Sonja, and just different people, and Lady Hawk, and I was like, well, I'm gonna really try to write, female characters better. And I did that, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try and write, more culturally diverse characters, or or whatever, and I really, now I pride myself on, like, I really don't think my fantasy world you'd be able to pick one really. I think you could pick like a Nordic, group of people, and maybe like a Spanish one, I would think. But everything else is, is pretty diverse, which I, take a lot of pride in. But again, that's what I like to read. I want that new stuff. So, those perspectives, like, your books, that's what I want. That's what I crave. There's so much of the older stuff and the older ways of doing things. I think that you could read forever, and, if you want to do that, that's fine. There's plenty of those books out there. But indie in particular, like you're saying, there's a lot of different, there are a lot of differences now in how people write. So stories like yours, I think this is the exact time for them personally. And I think
Mhm.
indie fantasy and sci-fi, and horror is a good outlet for them.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said earlier, like for me, like there are like a million fantasy protagonists who look like me, just like a white guy, brown hair and a beard. Like, and I didn't want to write another one of those because those characters have already been written for me millions of times.
Yep. Yep.
So to be able to write something that's outside of my own experiences as, like a white man, like to be able to write a different perspective, like a different characterization, and like representation matters, right? Like,
Yep.
be able
Totally.
to have that type of have that type of character be at the forefront and um not in like the derogative stereotypical way that you
The
normally
trope
see them
sphere.
depicted in like most westerns.
Yep.
Um
Yep.
like that was something that was like immediately appealing to me. And to have those conversations all the time, like when I excuse me when I first started writing the Bleeding Stone in 2020, like like I said, it was kind of a way to air those frustrations of like history just being poorly taught. And then a couple months after I started writing it was George Floyd's murder, and then we started having those conversations on a national level. um
Yeah. Yeah.
and like it was kind of like a contribution to that discussion, even if it wound up being published like a year and a half after the discussions happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But um but yeah, like yeah, my brain just stopped there. But yeah,
No,
having
no,
that
I totally get. Yeah.
yeah.
No, I totally get what you're saying. I think anytime that, I think anytime you can further the conversation, I think I think it's really important. I think there's a lot of issues that do need to be talked about. I know some people, they like to go in, I think cozy fantasy or clean fantasy, are not that I'm trying to just say that those are like always the safe realms or whatever, but there are always genres, or or writers or whatever. If you don't want to, I know people use the term woke all the time. I just consider it being learning. But I think there's different places you can go if you don't want to be faced with those kind of issues. But I bring people back to Malazan Book of the Fallen. Like Steve was writing about same-sex couples before anybody that I know, in terms of and he didn't put it in your face. It was like you almost had to like read between the lines, and then by the end of the series, you're like, oh, I totally see what he's doing. And it was like, and there were just so many examples of just things that I was very surprised that more people didn't talk about that he did and does. that, I was like, oh, that's really cool. I feel like there's so much more representation in his books than I never see anybody talk about his representation, but he does female characters very, very well, I feel like, for being a male author. And there's a lot of representation. You don't have that. I'm sorry, I love David Eddings's books, but you don't have that like one group of people or skin color are the bad guys versus the other thing. You don't have that in Malazan. So, and that's like, Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time is very similar to that, like there'll be like countries, be like more racist towards countries than, you know, race or whatever. But yeah, I think that anytime you can, contribute to that discussion and you want to, I think it's, really important. I think that again is where, indie really has a lot of strengths for it. But
Absolutely. And then like, yeah, you go to Erickson, and then like you like go a little further back into the 90s, and you get kind of like almost like the edginess of like Terry Goodkind, which is like
yeah, yeah,
like the complete opposite end of the spectrum with how regressive it was, like, and how
yep.
ridiculous it was. Like there was a Reddit thread yeah, a couple of weeks ago where just like all the insane stuff that Terry Goodkind wrote into the Sword of Truth. Like one of them was like the main character defeating communism by playing football or something like that. Like,
Yeah, Terry, I love the Wizard's First Rule, and I love the books. Terry is an interesting guy.
yeah,
Um, and that's all I'm gonna say on it.
yeah,
I try to stay out of that conversation.
yeah, fair.
That's where like there are certain people that there was a couple, there's a couple years ago, 2 years ago, where all of a sudden you found out in the indie community that there were certain male authors that were preying or treating female authors just in terms of disgusting manners, and or women at cons and stuff or conventions. And there's I'm like I won't support those people, and that's my choice, and you'll never see a review by me, and Terry was one of those guys where I read books, bought them used or got them from the library, and
Hmm.
didn't really want to give my money,
Yeah.
talented, but I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting guy, is
Hmm.
what I'll say to that. But on the air, but I have a lot of opinions off the air. But yeah, but yeah, definitely skilled. But that's where I think I tell my students all the time, in terms of like where you can use your skills. And I think as a person, as a history teacher, there are certain things I want to talk about, in terms of fantasy or sci-fi or or whatever. And I like to put those those enduring issues in there, because I think that is important. Because you said representation matters, and I totally agree. But I also think representing not just the people, but and the perspectives, but also the situations, I think is really important. I think that's where a lot of people sometimes don't think about. So I think you, to me, also have the situations that you're talking about, as well as the people. I think that's really important. So I think that's what is different, in terms of your writing and books versus your version, I would say, of historical fantasy versus maybe some others in the past. So
Hmm.
I think that that's really cool. But yeah, I just wanted to ask because I gotta ask. uh, and we talked a lot about like kind of like well we talked a bit about like how you combine some historical peoples in the context of this fantasy setting. But I was just curious in terms of like in terms of your fantasy setting, like what parts of it are fantasy? Like you do have magic then, I assume.
Hmm.
So I'm
Yeah. So
curious at what type of magic system like you kind of went with, and how you kind of went about that in terms of this type of setting and genre.
yeah. So it's very much like more like a low magic system. So it's
Hmm,
not like as like like as overt as like a Sanderson magic system is.
got it.
So the magic system is based off of like boons granted by the three animal gods that the
Hmm,
tribes in the series
that's cool.
revere. So there's a bear, a wolf, and an owl, and like they're and those are like the boons are relative to like strength, cunning, and wisdom,
Hmm,
respectively. So um just like kind of like give like a Spark Notes version of it. It's like
yeah.
basically when like when people in the tribes come of age, they undergo a trial, and if they pass that, they're granted a boon by whichever the gods they're more like most
Oh, cool.
compatible with.
Yeah, yeah.
So like they're compatible with the bear. They will give like be granted a boon of say strength or endurance. So it'll be like they're stronger, or they have greater stamina during battles, or likewise if they're like compatible with the owl, they may be granted enhanced knowledge, or be able to act as like interpreters for foreign languages, basically be granted like the knowledge of like any foreign tongue, like once they
Oh, that's
encounter
cool.
it, essentially.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so it's like it's much less like fireballs flying everywhere, and more just kind of like something that's more ingrained in the culture,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
you have like these different like like I don't want to call them sects, but like similar to that in each tribe, where like they have their own group of like warriors, of hunters, of scholars, and the magic system kind of permeates through like those
Mm.
groups, essentially.
Oh, that's cool. That's super cool. So I have to ask because I just think it's a great question. I must know. Um, would you rather be a spellbinder or a gunslinger?
So um just being a spellbinder, like in like the context of the series, like it just would be much more interesting to have like some type of boon granted based on,
Yeah.
like if like I was granted like memory or knowledge or something, that'd be cool, because like I have the memory of a goldfish.
I
Or
get that. I have a kid, so yeah, I get that.
yeah, or like knowledge would help because I have a horrible attention span. Like and then like just being a gunslinger would be boring, because it's like, oh yeah, my special power is gun. Like
Yeah.
that's um
You just ostracize all of Stephen King's fans right now, but that's okay. But I think most people, would consider the same thing, I mean, like we have gunslingers, and are they super cool? Yeah, John Wayne, you have those typical Eastwood type characters. Um, I'm totally forgetting. There was that awesome female character from the '90s where she had to shoot Gene Hackman, and then Leonardo DiCaprio was in the I
oh
can't believe I'm blanking on that great movie. But anyways, her character was amazing. So super cool. But yeah, I definitely think I would have to go Spellbinder as well. It would just be cool to do something, especially the context, what you're saying, that they're using them, in terms of, the different sects and stuff like that. But yeah,
mhm.
that'd be super cool. So if you had one character that you could meet, all right, and I always say like maybe go on an adventure with, but like if you had one of your characters you could meet and either ask them anything or go on an adventure with, who would it be and why?
So I feel like it's almost a cop out, but like my main character Sen, just because I want to see how she's doing, because like I put her through the ringer, and I feel like she just kind of needs a hug.
I like that. I like how you put that. I just want to see how she's doing.
Yeah, it's like
That's
it's
awesome.
like, hey buddy, you're drinking a lot again, are you okay?
Just
So
like the pat on the back. My son will do
yeah.
that when I hold him. Like, I think he's like watching me 9 months. I think he knows when I'm having a rough day. The other day, he just like is on my arm and just goes, I'm like, I needed that, buddy.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a great answer. So we'll go with that last question there. Sorry, I know it's hard because I made you pick like a favorite child. I know that's really hard for a lot of authors and artists and people like that. Um, I know everybody always got one in the back of their mind though.
Mhm.
Looking at you, mom. She always likes to say, "I love you both equally," but we know who the favorite is. But for that last one, do you have any news updates or current projects, anything like that that you could share with us?
Yeah, so the final book in the Spellbinders and the Gunslingers trilogy, the first draft of it was just finished last month.
Oh,
I
that's
sent it
awesome.
off to my editor. It'll be looked at in like November, December. I'm planning on releasing that in the spring, so
Cool.
around March or April. Um, so more details of that will be to come around January, February. Then other than that, the I mentioned that urban fantasy novel that I wrote
Yeah,
a few
yeah.
years back. I'm going to be spending time on that next year to rework it a bit.
That's cool.
It's kind of a cross between Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman and the Netflix series Sense8. So
Oh, that's cool.
keep an eye out for that towards the end of 2024. And my next project is actually kind of be more lighthearted. Like I don't know if it's gonna if you can consider it middle grade or YA, just because the main character is probably gonna be like 11,
Hmm.
but it's gonna be much more like whimsical and lighthearted, something that I just kind of wanted to write for my niece and nephew, mainly because I want
Oh, that's
something
cool.
much less depressing to write next.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's
So it'll
fair.
be a little more like
Palette cleanser.
yeah, it'll be a little more Pratchett-esque
Oh,
is the
okay, that's
goal
cool.
there. Kind of dealing a little more with Celtic dragons.
Oh,
So
that's
that will
cool.
be. I'm hoping I can get that done in time before Spiffbo 10
Hmm.
starts next year. But we'll
Oh,
see
yeah,
how
that'd
that
be cool.
goes.
Yeah, yeah. I think anytime you
And
get your
yeah,
Pratchettist on, that's a really good thing. So,
yep. Yeah, and if I can get grouped into the Weatherwax report again, that'll be great because Esme is a follower of Terry Pratchett. So
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really cool. That's super cool. Well, that all sounds really awesome. I look forward to seeing, all three of those books and those future projects. That all
well, thank
sounds
you.
absolutely amazing. So, but thank you again. I want to thank you for coming on. Just want to remind everybody, in the audience, in case you're new, look down in the description, or if you're hearing this on audio, look to the description everywhere where this podcast is found. You can find all of Joe's links there, books, socials, things like that. Please, please, please don't forget that we're really trying to focus on reviewing every product. So whether or not you buy Joe's physical book, Kindle, Audible, just want to also mention Audible and Goodreads are not linked right now. Amazon and Goodreads are as of this podcast. So we want to remind people that if you're listening on one, please make sure you're going to the other one and transferring those. I have, I think, two left that I have from Audible to Amazon to transfer reviews. But again, that's how everybody is, making their dimes, including as I had Amy Hutchinson on 2 episodes ago. She's a voice actress, so she also, makes money via those reviews as well. So please make sure you guys are doing those to help people out like Joe and her. Joe, thank you so much for coming out. If there's anything at all that I can do for you between now and then, this will come out about January. Like I said, I'll send you the date. So it's kind of nice. We'll kind of be in sync for, book tour or something like that. Get the word out there. But if there's anything else you need, just let me know. But other than that, I look forward to talking to you on Twitter and or X or whatever they change it to
Yeah.
tomorrow. But yeah, if there's anything else you need, just let me know. Send me an email, a message, thing like that, and I'll help you out as best I can, my friend.
All right. Thank you very much, Daniel. It's been great being here.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Joe, you have a great rest of the day, and I will talk to you later, my friend.
All righty. Thank you.
See you.